I'm 28 years old, and this past Easter Sunday turned my world upside down. That's when I stumbled on undeniable proof that my wife, who's 27, was having an affair. The very next day, I confronted her with the evidence. It was clear and irrefutable. After that, I left and haven't spoken to her since, nor do I plan to. We're getting a divorce, but honestly, even that feels meaningless right now. I feel like a broken man, utterly shattered. I thought my wife and I had the kind of relationship people dream about. We were best friends, always lifting each other up and making life better in every way. We'd known each other since childhood, started dating during the last couple of years of high school, and stayed together all through college. When it came to physical intimacy, we were each other's first everything. We went to the same university but pursued different majors. 2 years after graduation, we tied the knot. After that, we moved to a big city not far from where we grew up so we could stay close to family. I landed a solid job as an engineer, with a good salary and great benefits. She became a teacher at a prestigious private school, a role she genuinely loved. Together, we did well financially, which meant we could enjoy life to the fullest. We traveled often, ate out all the time, and turned even mundane evenings into date nights. Whether we were with friends or just the two of us, it always felt like we were a team. We were the kind of couple who looked so happy together that people could have used our pictures to sell photo frames. Our sex life? Fantastic. If we weren't intimate at least 4 times a week, it felt like something was off. Life was good, at least that's what I believed. We'd even been planning to start trying for kids soon. But now, I realize it was all a lie. I feel blindsided, broken, and betrayed. I can't stop crying. I wanted to be a dad someday, and now that feels like it's never going to happen. Easter morning started innocently enough. We were up early to help out at our church, hiding eggs for the kids to find later. Still half asleep, we threw on some clothes and drove there together. We spent the morning stashing brightly colored eggs, some easy to find for the little ones, others hidden well for the older kids. My wife took lots of pictures with her phone, snapping shots of us and other folks from the congregation. Afterward, we all sat around with coffee and donuts, chatting before heading home. I'd driven to the church, but on the way back, I asked her to take the wheel. When we got home, she said she was going to crash for a bit. Meanwhile, I planned to check out some college basketball coverage since my dad went to Baylor, and they were in the championship game. We'd brought along her iPad, which I used all the time like it was mine. I wasn't expecting to find anything out of the ordinary. As I was reading an article on it, though, something strange happened. In the bottom corner of the screen, an icon popped up, something about photos. Then, out of nowhere, pictures started flashing by, one after the other. At first, it was just shots she'd taken at the church that morning. I didn't think much of it and kept reading. But then, a few images zipped by that stopped me cold. They looked explicit, and that was completely out of character for her. I tried tapping the screen to go back, but it was like those pictures weren't actually saved on the iPad. They just flashed briefly and disappeared. Confused, I opened the photo app but couldn't find anything remotely inappropriate. None of the church photos were there, either. I started wondering if her phone had somehow synced with the iPad or if something weird was going on with our Wi-Fi. Either way, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She walked into the kitchen, grabbed a water bottle, and said she was heading upstairs to bed. As I watched her go, a thought hit me for the first time ever in our relationship. She might be hiding something from me. I spent the next few minutes digging through every file on the iPad, desperate to figure out what I'd seen. But when I came up empty, I realized I needed to check her phone. I went upstairs, found her sound asleep, and took her phone off the charger. Now, we'd never had strict rules about our devices. We'd always shared them freely, no questions asked. But when I tried to unlock her phone, I hit a wall. The passcode had been changed. My heart sank. I tried a few more times, thinking maybe I'd made a mistake, but no, it was definitely different. Tears welled up in my eyes as it hit me. She was keeping something from me, something I needed to know. I placed her phone back on the charger and stood there, trying to convince myself I was imagining things. Maybe I'd misinterpreted what I saw, and there was some innocent explanation. I even pictured us laughing about it later. But deep down, I knew better. That changed passcode was like a flashing red light, screaming that something was wrong. I tried my best to act normal, but it wasn't easy. She knows me better than anyone, so keeping my emotions bottled up while sneaking around felt almost impossible. Late that afternoon, while she was in the kitchen, I heard her phone's text alert go off. I peeked around the corner just in time to see her enter a completely new passcode. That was the confirmation I needed. I wasn't imagining things. That night, after she went to bed, I took her phone to the bathroom again. I entered the new code and opened her photo album. At first, there was nothing unusual. I found the pictures she'd taken at the church earlier that morning, but none of them were inappropriate. I was about to close the app, thinking I'd jumped to conclusions, when it occurred to me to check the recently deleted folder. My stomach dropped. There were 2 nude photos of her, one fully naked, the other partially, and a naked picture of a man I didn't recognize. My hands were shaking as I forwarded the photos to my own phone, then immediately deleted the sent messages and the photos from her phone. Once everything was back the way it was, I quietly put her phone back in its place. I walked downstairs to avoid making noise and barely made it to the restroom before throwing up like I'd been poisoned. The images played over and over in my mind as I tried to process what I'd seen. I'd never seen her take pictures like that before. It wasn't something she did, and honestly, it wasn't something I'd ever wanted. I'd always thought those kinds of photos were risky, the sort of thing that could haunt you later. Besides, I didn't need them. I had her all to myself whenever I wanted, and I already knew how stunning she was without clothes. At least, that's what I'd always believed. As for the man in the picture, I had no clue who he was. But even without knowing his name, the sight of him filled me with a rage I couldn't control. After I was done throwing up, I collapsed onto the bathroom floor and cried harder than I ever had in my life. I didn't know who I was anymore or what was happening to my life, but I could feel it in my gut. Something was horribly wrong. I managed to get a few hours of restless sleep next to her before my alarm went off for work. That day, nothing else mattered. Every project I had going got put on hold as I dove into figuring out how to recover deleted messages from her phone. Since the phone plan was in my name through my job, I had access to all the text messages and media sent through it. When I finally accessed the data, I found everything: explicit texts, selfies, and even videos of them together. The proof was irrefutable. I can't say I threw up again because there was nothing left, but the dry heaving was just as painful. By 2 a.m., I was completely emptied, both physically and emotionally. I went down to my car and sat there, sobbing so hard I thought my eyes might bleed. This couldn't be real. The woman who was my best friend, the person I'd built my life around, had betrayed me in the worst way. In that moment, I knew our marriage was over. Every dream we'd shared had gone up in flames. I screamed, a raw, primal sound that came from somewhere deep inside me. I was grateful she wasn't there to see me like that. I didn't know what I was capable of, and I didn't want to find out. I couldn't think straight. Who do you even call when the person you'd normally turn to is the one who destroyed you? I sat there in a daze, frozen and unsure of what to do. Eventually, I decided to head back inside and get through my morning, knowing it would be a complete waste of a day. I went into work, touched base with my team about our project, and then left. I didn't want to see her, let alone confront her, so stopping by her school wasn't even an option. Instead, I just drove aimlessly for hours, cycling between sobbing and seething anger. The evidence I'd uncovered was so damning, so final, that there was no escaping it. For a moment, I even thought about sending everything I'd found, pictures, texts, videos, to her and our families in one email before driving my car off a cliff. I felt so completely lost, like there was nothing left to live for. The thought of facing her to end our marriage felt unbearable, but so did the idea of continuing to exist in this nightmare. My wife usually got home from work a few hours before I did, So I decided to park down the street from her school and watch where she went after the day ended. Given what I'd uncovered, I was convinced she'd head straight to her lover's place for a quick hookup. But to my surprise, she drove directly home, completely unaware I was tailing her most of the way. At work, I had printed out a stack of texts and pictures as evidence, pages and pages of it. I imagined confronting her, expecting she'd deny everything until I shoved the proof in her face. But the thought of any confrontation, any conversation, made my stomach churn. I didn't want to argue, fight, or even look at her ever again. Those pictures alone had snuffed out any love I'd ever had for her. In just a single day, I'd gone from adoring her with all my heart to despising her with every fiber of my being. How could she betray me like this? The second she cheated, our marriage was over. I'd just been the last one to realize it. My head was spinning as I pulled into the driveway. My only plan was to grab a bag, pack enough for the work week, and disappear without a word if I could manage it. When I walked through the front door, there she was, sitting on the couch and texting. Maybe it was her mom or sister she was messaging. Or maybe it was him. I didn't know, and honestly, I didn't care. That day, I'd learned enough to know the odds were high she was doing something else behind my back. She looked up, smiling. "You're home early," she said casually. I didn't respond. I walked straight down the hall to our bedroom, grabbed a suitcase from the closet, and started packing clothes. She followed me in, standing in the doorway. "Are you going on a last-minute work trip?" she asked, her voice full of curiosity. I paused, looked her dead in the eye with a glare I'm sure she'll never forget, and then went back to packing. She stepped closer, putting a hand on my back. That simple touch made my skin crawl. I jerked away like I'd just been burned and yelled, "Don't you ever touch me again!" before shoving her hand off me. Her face twisted with confusion and concern. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling. "What's going on?" I repeated, my voice dripping with venom. "You're a filthy, disease-ridden whore. That's what's going on. You don't deserve anything but a red-hot poker to make sure you never have kids." Her jaw dropped, and she looked genuinely shocked, like she had the right to feel hurt. That's when I pulled out the stack of printed pages, tossed them onto the bed, zipped up my suitcase, and headed for the door. She sat on the edge of the bed and started flipping through the papers. Before I made it down the hall, I heard her scream, "No!" followed by loud sobbing. Seconds later, I heard her footsteps running after me. I didn't stop. I threw my suitcase into the car and climbed in. She made it outside just as I was pulling out of the driveway. I didn't say a word, just flipped her off through the window as I drove away. Not long after, my phone started buzzing like a slot machine hitting the jackpot. I didn't need to check to know it was her, so I just turned it off. I had no intention of answering, and I didn't care what she had to say. Whatever excuses or explanations she had weren't my problem. She knew damn well infidelity was a deal-breaker. I checked into a cheap motel about a mile from work. After dumping my suitcase in the room, I forced myself to eat at the restaurant next door, though I barely tasted the food. Back in the motel room, I used the landline to call my mom. She was worried. Apparently, my wife had already called her, probably right after I left. "Did she tell you why I'm gone?" I asked. "No," Mom said softly. So, I told her everything. I told her what I'd found, explained that we were divorcing, and mentioned I'd be looking for a job out of state. There was no way I'd stay anywhere near my soon-to-be ex-wife or her family. Mom broke down crying. I couldn't see her, but I could hear it, ugly, heart-wrenching sobs of disbelief and grief. I knew she was mourning more than just my marriage. The idea that she'd never hold a grandchild from me hit her hard, I'm sure. But she knows how I was raised, and she knew this was the end. There was no coming back from what my wife had done. After the call with my mom, I was emotionally drained. I cried until I finally passed out, but the peace didn't last long. Around midnight, a knock at the door startled me awake. Groggy and annoyed, I shuffled to the peephole, only to see my soon-to-be ex-wife standing there, looking desperate. I couldn't fathom how she tracked me down or figured out which room I was in, but it didn't matter. I didn't want to see her. I didn't want to hear her excuses. She had lost the right to speak to me the moment she betrayed me. Without hesitation, I picked up the motel phone, not to call my mom this time, but the police. The dispatcher stayed on the line as 2 officers were sent out. I stood there in silence, watching through the peephole as the police escorted her away from my door. One of the officers came back to knock, and I let him in. He assured me she wouldn't be allowed back and asked how I wanted to proceed. I told him I wanted her to leave me alone, completely and permanently. We went through the paperwork for a restraining order right there in the motel room. The officer made sure I understood the restrictions, like how I'd need a police escort if I wanted to go back to the house for any of my belongings. I told him there was no need. I never wanted to set foot in that house again. As far as I was concerned, she could have everything. By the time they got her signature on the restraining order and drove away, it was the early hours of the morning. I collapsed back onto the bed, managing to get a few restless hours of sleep. The next morning, I dragged myself into work, exhausted and hollowed out. My coworkers were concerned, thinking I'd left early the day before because I was sick. I told them I still felt under the weather and would be working from my office all day to avoid spreading anything. Not long after, I called my boss and asked him to meet with me privately. 15 minutes later, he was sitting across from me, probably expecting an update on the team's progress. Instead, I laid it all out, how I'd discovered my wife's infidelity, and how it had completely derailed my life. He looked just as stunned as I'd felt when I first found out. I didn't tell him about my plans to leave the state yet, but I made it clear that reconciliation wasn't on the table. As far as I'm concerned, she's dead to me, I said, barely holding back tears. I explained that I needed work more than ever, not for the paycheck, but for the distraction. He was understanding, telling me I could work as much as I needed and even crash at the office if it helped. His kindness hit me hard, and I thanked him before asking him to keep everything between us until the inevitable rumors started. After work, I drove to my parents' house for dinner. My siblings and their spouses were there too, turning it into a small family gathering. Toward the end of the meal, my parents pulled me aside and gently suggested I share what had happened. Standing there in front of my family, I felt a mix of shame and anger, but I told them everything. The news landed like a gut punch, ruining everyone's appetite. 2 of my siblings admitted they'd gotten calls from my ex after I left, and had even felt bad for her, not knowing the full story. "I wish you'd called me," one said, clenching their fists. "I would have told her exactly what I think of her." I shook my head. "Don't waste your energy on her. She's not worth it. Just block her, ignore her, and move on. That's all I want, for her and anyone tied to her to be completely out of our lives." I made it clear that her family wasn't to blame for her actions, but I also didn't want any contact with them. My wife had proven she wasn't deserving of our attention, positive or negative. I also told them about my plans to find a new job in another state, to put as much distance as possible between me and everything she tainted. My family's reactions were mixed. Some were furious, not at me, but at the unfairness of the situation. They hated that I was the one who had to uproot my life while she stayed behind, seemingly unscathed. "It doesn't seem fair," one of them said. "It's not," I replied. "But I can't change her or what she did. All I can do is move forward." And that's exactly what I planned to do. The following day, I had my first meeting with my lawyer. In our state, infidelity matters in divorce proceedings, so the thick stack of evidence I'd brought was met with a nod of approval. I went into that meeting determined to approach everything logically, keeping emotions at bay. I've always believed emotions are fleeting and letting them dictate your decisions leads to chaos. I explained that I wanted her and her team to handle all communication with my wife until the divorce was finalized. I also mentioned the restraining order already in place. As far as our possessions went, I didn't care about any of it. Every single thing we owned reminded me of her and the life we'd built, one she'd shattered without a second thought. All I cared about was ensuring she couldn't touch my 401k or any investments I had before the marriage. That's when my lawyer asked me a simple but pivotal question: did I want a fair and straightforward divorce, or did I want to pursue a scorched earth strategy? I sat there in silence for a moment, staring at my hands. A week ago, I would have chosen fairness without hesitation. Back then, I'd still believed in decency and mutual respect. But now, all I felt was loathing. This woman, the person I trusted above all others, had lied to me, betrayed me, and destroyed the life I thought we had. Looking up, I told my lawyer to take every legal avenue available to make the divorce as painful as possible for her. I didn't care about the spoils. Anything I got would go straight into a bonfire once the dust settled. In my mind's eye, that bonfire was enormous, roaring so brightly it could be seen from space. I wanted her to feel the full weight of what she'd done. I also asked my lawyer to investigate the affair partner. If they could figure out who he was, I wanted to pursue an alienation of affection lawsuit. Our state allows you to sue someone who played a role in ending a marriage, and I intended to use every tool at my disposal. If this man had a partner, I wanted her to know, too. No secrets, no mercy. I was out for blood. Later that day, my lawyer called to let me know my wife had been served at her workplace. She invited me to the office after work to speak with the process server. Part of me just wanted to hear about her reaction, as twisted as that sounds. The courier and I sat in a small office, and he recounted the event. He'd gone to her school around mid-morning, checked in at the front office, and was escorted to her classroom. She was teaching a lesson when the faculty member opened the door. He walked in, verified her name, and handed her the divorce papers, stating the cause was infidelity. According to him, she looked completely blindsided, shocked by how quickly things were moving and mortified to be served in front of her students. He said she barely held it together, fighting back tears, until he left the room. As he exited, he glanced back and saw her collapse to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. Hearing that brought a cold, detached satisfaction. She deserved every ounce of humiliation and pain. Now, as I sit here writing all this, I'm not even sure why I'm doing it. Maybe it's just to get it all out, to make sense of the chaos. I don't think I need advice. I have a plan, and the divorce is moving forward. But the truth is, I hurt so much, and I don't know how to stop. I'm not suicidal, not in the slightest. I don't want to die. I just want my old life back, the one I can never have again. She destroyed something pure, something you only get once in a lifetime. And despite the tears she shed when she was served, I know deep down she didn't truly care. If she had, she wouldn't have done what she did. What's crushing me is the thought of a lifetime spent alone. I can't imagine rebuilding with someone else, not after what she did to me. I feel like everything I've worked for and dreamed of has turned to ash. I hate myself for wasting years on her, for giving her the best parts of me. Sure, I have a career and the ability to move forward, but the idea of doing it alone for the rest of my days feels unbearable. It's overwhelming, and I don't know how to keep going. I think I should explain why I said I'll never be a father, and why I expect to be alone for the rest of my life. It boils down to how I was raised and the beliefs I've held since I was old enough to understand relationships. My wife was raised the same way, which is part of what brought us so close in the first place. At least I thought it did. Clearly, in the end, none of it mattered to her. She threw it all away and took us both down in the process. I grew up believing that people aren't meant to hop from one bed to another, chasing fleeting pleasures with random hookups. To me, the most meaningful, fulfilling relationship is one where two people have only ever known each other in that way. I get that in today's world, this belief probably sounds outdated or even naive. But I've always thought there's something profoundly beautiful about two people discovering intimacy together, learning, growing, and building something uniquely theirs. When that's the case, there's no worrying about past partners, no fear of diseases or unintended consequences, and no comparisons to anyone who came before. You're building a connection that's pure and untainted, free from all the baggage that comes with modern casual encounters. At least, that's how it's supposed to work. That's what I was taught. It's also what my wife claimed to believe in. Over and over, she told me how grateful she was that we lived our lives the way we did. She said she cherished our bond, something she said was rare and special in today's world. But now, I see those words for what they were, empty lies. And none of it matters anymore. Because of this mindset, reconciliation with her is impossible. There's no going back. I could never see her as attractive again, not after what she's done. It's as if she's covered in the filth of her betrayal, and nothing, no amount of bleach, no high-pressure wash, could ever make her clean in my eyes. Just a week ago, the mere thought of her could excite me. Now, if she stood before me, naked and offering herself, my only reaction would be to spit on her in disgust before turning away, probably sick to my stomach. Her betrayal didn't just destroy what we had, it ruined my ability to create that bond with anyone else. Even if I met someone who shared my values, I couldn't give them what they deserve. I'm no longer whole in the way I once was, and that kind of relationship demands a wholeness I can't get back. I know this isn't a popular viewpoint anymore. Plenty of people treat intimacy casually, see it as just another hobby, or find nothing wrong with moving from partner to partner. That's their choice, and I'm not here to judge. People have different opinions, and I know mine is far from standard. But for me, it's always been about one person and one lifelong bond. That's the way it's supposed to be, at least, that's what I've always believed. My wife, on the other hand, decided to throw those beliefs away and become, well, let's just say she turned into someone I never thought she could be. And now, I'm left to deal with the aftermath of her choices. It feels horribly unfair. I didn't commit the sin, yet I'm the one condemned to live with its consequences. I'm the one stuck in this lonely, unbearable existence. I'd been doing a decent job keeping my mind occupied with work these past few days. I've made huge progress on the company project, partly because all my waking hours have been spent holed up in my office. Honestly, it felt pointless to keep paying for a motel room when my office couch is comfortable enough to crash on. This morning, I woke up determined to push even further ahead on the project. I also planned to start exploring job opportunities in other states. But when I sat down at my desk and glanced at the date on my computer, something hit me like a freight train. Today is her birthday. Of course, I had no intention of reaching out to her or sending any kind of well wishes. But just seeing the date triggered a wave of emotions I wasn't prepared for. I realized something I hadn't considered before. This date will always be hers. It's hers in my mind, no matter how much time passes or how far away I go. It's bad enough that the holidays are creeping closer, each one likely to dredge up memories of when I had someone to share them with. I thought I could power through those days, bury myself in work, and move on. But this? A day like today? It'll come every year, and it'll always bring her back to me, whether I want it to or not. I want so badly to erase every memory of her from my mind, to forget she ever existed. What used to be moments I cherished are now nothing more than bitter reminders of lies, betrayal, and heartbreak. I can't live with that hanging over me for the rest of my life. I just can't. It's astonishing how quickly life can flip your entire world upside down. Just 1 week ago, I thought I had it all, a partner, a future, a purpose. And now? It's all gone. Shattered into pieces I can't even begin to pick up. I know some people hate me for the things I've said, for my beliefs, for my anger. And that's fine. I don't expect everyone to understand. The language I've used and the feelings I've expressed aren't who I normally am. But her actions? They screamed far louder and harsher things to me than anything I could ever say to her. The truth is, when something ends, it's over. There's no going back, no undoing it, and no pretending it didn't happen. Some might say I should seek help, try to reframe all of this in a way that feels less devastating. But I'm not one to sugarcoat things, not even for myself. My grandpa always said you don't blow smoke up anyone's ass, and that includes your own. So that's it. I'm done. This isn't how I thought things would end. Not like this, not now. But sometimes life can be so cruel, so unforgiving, that continuing just doesn't feel possible anymore. To anyone reading this, I truly hope you find peace in this life. Hold on to it if you do. As for love, I wouldn't wish it on anyone, not even my worst enemy. God bless.